Let me ask you a dangerous question. That's right, one that almost no one dares to formulate. One that, if it's true, changes the entire history of humanity. Is the true seal of God in your soul or in your DNA? Because Genesis says we were created in image and likeness. Enoch says there were forbidden mixtures. Atrahasis speaks of clay and divine blood. And the ancient cultures repeat the same pattern again and again, as if they were trying to tell us something we forgot. So I'll ask again, who designed what we are? A spiritual creator? A group of Elohim working together? Or beings who manipulated the human code and left their signature inside every cell? If the seal is biological, if the seal is a code, then nothing is as we were told. The Nephilim would not be myths. The Watchers would not be metaphors. The flood would not be punishment. It would be a reset. And the celestial war would not be a fight between angels. It would be a battle for our genetic programming. Coders. What if your DNA is the evidence of the oldest conflict in the universe? What if the mark of the Creator was altered by those who fell to teach us the forbidden? Today, we're going into the most delicate, most controversial, and most closely watched territory of this entire saga. Today, we ask out loud, who controls the human code? The Creator, or the gods who descended from the sky? Get ready, because this is the final mystery of the seal, and the beginning of the conflict for human inheritance. Before we begin, and dive all the way in, let me explain something to you. And we need you to understand this. This is not just another video. It's not an isolated episode. It's not a random theory to kill some time. This is the axis of the entire saga. Everything you've seen, the Anunnaki, Dilmun, the trees of Eden, the Watchers, the hybrids, the rebellions in heaven, Enki, Enlil, Lucifer, the Serpent, Atrahasis, was converging toward a single point, the origin of the human code. And this video is exactly that, the piece that connects all the stories. Why is it so important to watch until the end? Because this episode answers the question ancient texts never address directly, but which is hidden in every myth, every verse, every tablet. Who really controls what we are? Not who created the universe, not who is good or evil, not who fell or who obeyed, but who designed your DNA, who modified it, who wanted to destroy it, and who fought to protect it. All of that is here. Now yes, with nothing more to add, let's begin. The origin of the seal. Coders. If we're going to discover what the seal of God really is, first we have to go back to the beginning, to the first verse that speaks about our identity. In Genesis 1:26, it is written, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." For centuries, this passage was read as a spiritual symbol, as if image meant soul, and likeness meant morality. But the text never says that. It never explains exactly what that seal means. It only states that it exists. A divine seal placed upon humanity. A design that makes us different from everything else that breathes on earth. And here the forbidden question is born. Coders, what if that image and likeness was not a spiritual metaphor, but a biological imprint? Because in many ancient traditions, from Sumer to Qumran, it is described that the gods left a mark on their creation, a sign, a signature, an element that set them apart from the rest. In the Bible, that concept appears as a seal, a mark of the Creator upon what is created. In Sumerian tradition, that mark is literal, a mixture of clay and divine blood. In modern writings, some researchers call it a code, DNA, an inner design, a mathematical pattern, a seal not seen in the soul, but in our cells. Coders. This is the starting point. Before the flood, before the Watchers, before the celestial rebellion. The seal was here from the beginning. And if we follow the clues, we'll discover that behind that image and likeness, there may be something deeper than traditional theology, a message written in our genes. Textual evidence of genetic manipulation. Coders. If the seal was in the DNA, then there had to be clues. Clues in the texts, clues in the myths, clues in the words that were always there, but which no one dared to read without fear. And when we open those ancient texts, the first thing that appears is something most people overlook. In Genesis 1:26 it does not say, "I will create man." It says, "Let us make man in our image." Let us make, plural. Elohim, a term that does not mean a single God, but a group, a council, a heavenly assembly. Coders. What kind of creation needs a team? Then comes Genesis 2:7. God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. But that breath, that ruach, is also interpreted as activation, ignition, beginning, as if something had been switched on inside that body of clay, as if that breath weren't just poetry, but a process. And when we step outside Genesis and look at the book of Enoch, the story becomes even clearer. Enoch describes the Watchers teaching forbidden mixtures, teaching secrets that were not meant for humans, intervening in bloodlines that were not meant to be touched, forbidden mixtures or genetic modifications. And then coders. There's the Atrahasis tablet, the oldest text that describes human creation, a text older than the Bible, a Sumerian text that says, without metaphors, that man was created with clay plus divine blood. Not soul, not magic, not just dust and breath, a biological mixture, clay as the base, divine blood as the code. Coders. When you bring the Bible, Enoch, and Atrahasis together, the pattern stops looking like allegory. It starts to look like a project, an intervention, an engineering. Enki as a biological engineer. Coders. If we follow the oldest footprints of humanity, they all lead to the same name, Enki. Not as a god of temples and offerings, but as an engineer, a biological architect, the true designer of the human being. The Sumerian tablets say it without metaphors. In the Atrahasis poem translated by Kramer and Botero, the creation of man is described with two ingredients, clay and divine blood, a precise, intentional, calculated mixture. And the one directing the process is not Enlil, is not Anu, it's Enki. The text states that he selects the earthly material, extracts the essence of a sacrificed god, and combines both substances to shape the human according to the established design. Enki does not simply observe creation, he builds it. His role as god of wisdom also includes the ME laws, the codes that govern life, the organization of the world, the arts, science, intelligence, and, according to modern interpretations, behavioral and structural patterns. Something very similar to what we would today call genetic information. But there's more. In the myth of Enki and Ninhursag, Dilmun does not appear as a spiritual paradise, but as a perfect space, without illness, without defects, without death. An ideal environment, like a laboratory designed to experiment with forms of life. It is there that Enki performs corrections, interventions, adjustments. When an organism fails, he modifies it. When something doesn't work, he looks for balance. When humanity faces limits, he introduces new capacities. Coders. Enki doesn't just create, he iterates, improves, refines, as if the human being was a project in development, and he, the lead engineer. And it is precisely that constant intervention, that hand in human evolution, that would ignite the greatest of wars in the sky. Enlil and the fear of an over-advanced human. Coders. In the oldest stories in the world, there's a pattern that always repeats. Every time the human being awakens, someone in heaven becomes uneasy, and no text shows it as clearly as the Sumerian and biblical accounts of Enlil. While Enki saw potential, Enlil saw danger, while one saw humanity as a project that had to evolve. The other saw it as something that had to be kept under control. In the Atrahasis epic, this is brutally clear. When humanity begins to multiply, to learn, to organize, to think too intensely, Enlil pronounces a phrase that changed history. They are too noisy. But coders, that noise was not sound. It was consciousness, progress, evolution. For Enlil, a human that thinks too much is a human that stops obeying. And the same concern shows up in the Hebrew narrative. In Genesis 3:22, after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, the divine voice declares, "Now the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." There are the exact words. It does not say, "Man has fallen." It says, "Man has become like one of us." Enlil, the highest authority, didn't fear disobedience. He feared equality. He feared a human with the same ability to understand, discern, choose. That's why knowledge was forbidden. That's why the tree was guarded. That's why the serpent was censored. And that's why, in Atrahasis, Enlil decides to trigger a full reset, the flood. Not because humans were evil, but because they were advancing too far. Coders, here is where the conflict that runs through this entire saga is born. A heaven that wants to maintain order. A God that wants us not to awaken. And another God, Enki, willing to defy that authority so that humanity can reach its true potential. The serpent and the genetic awakening. Coders. There's a detail in Eden that almost nobody stops to observe. And it's exactly the detail that changes everything. In Genesis 3:1, the Bible says, "But the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field." Nothing more. It doesn't say it was a demon. It doesn't say it was Satan. It doesn't say it was an enemy of heaven. Just serpent. But when this being speaks, it does not offer evil or destruction. It offers something much more dangerous: knowledge. In Genesis 3:5, the serpent speaks the key phrase, "Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And the most disturbing part, coders, is that the Bible confirms that this happened. In Genesis 3:7 it says, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened." Opening of eyes. Awakening, activation of consciousness. That is the language of switching on, not of falling. But when we look toward Sumer, everything fits even more. Because there, the serpent was not a symbol of evil, but of wisdom, healing, and biological knowledge. The emblem of Enki, the god who taught the forbidden, the engineer of life. In the Dilmun myth, the serpent appears, protecting the source of life, just like in Eden. Two gardens, two cultures, two serpents tied to human awakening, not corruption. So the question is no longer who the serpent was, but what it represented. A deceiver, or an activator, an enemy of heaven, or a master who awakened the code Enlil wanted to keep asleep. Because if opening of eyes equals activation of consciousness, then what happened in Eden was not a sin, it was a genetic awakening. The Nephilim, as evidence of hybrid manipulation, coders. What happens after the awakening in Eden is not an isolated story. It's the direct consequence of a project that began much earlier, and which ancient texts describe without filters: mixing, hybridization, genetic intervention. Genesis 6:2 says, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves." Genesis 6:4 adds, "There were giants on the earth in those days, the mighty men of old, men of renown." But what for many is just poetry, for the older texts is forbidden biology. In the book of Enoch, chapter 7, it is detailed that the Watchers descended, mixed with human women, and engendered hybrid beings that belonged to neither species. Enoch describes these beings as violent giants, capable of devouring everything in their path, the result of a forbidden mixture that corrupted the original creation. This pattern is not exclusive to the Hebrews. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were hybrids, half-gods, half-humans. In Greece, heroes were children of gods and mortals. Heracles, Achilles, Perseus. In Egypt, pharaohs mixed divine blood with human lineage. In Mesoamerica, giants and demigods appear as guardians of an ancient knowledge, cultures separated by thousands of kilometers, describing the same phenomenon: genetic intervention between sky beings and humans. And right after that global hybridization, an event repeats across countless mythologies. The flood, the biological reset. Coders, the Nephilim are not an exception. They are evidence of a universal pattern. Someone modified human genetics, and the result was so dangerous that heaven decided to restart everything from zero. The corruption of the genetic code and the flood coders. Here we reach one of the darkest points in all ancient narrative: the corruption of the code, the alteration of the original design. In Genesis 6:12, the Reina Valera version declares, "So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth." That verse is key, because it doesn't talk about sins, rituals, or wars. It talks about corrupt flesh, about something that affected biology, the species, the genetics. And here the ancient texts agree in a chilling way. In the Sumerian tablets of the Atrahasis poem, Enlil observes the same, that humanity is no longer as before, that something in its essence has been altered, and he declares that the project must be reset. In other words, the original design was contaminated. That's why Enlil orders the flood, not as moral punishment, but as a biological reset. But then the figure that changes everything appears: Enki, the protector of humanity. While Enlil prepares extinction, the Atrahasis poem tells that Enki breaks the prohibition, warns the chosen human, Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, Atrahasis, depending on the tradition, and gives him instructions to preserve the original human line. That's how the vessel is born. That's how the survivor appears. That's how the human seed that would restart the species is preserved. Coders. The flood was not just a divine punishment. It was a reset of the DNA. An attempt to restore the human version from before the mixing, contamination, and alterations that produced giants, hybrids, and beings that belonged neither to heaven nor earth. And if the texts are right, the great war of the gods was not spiritual. It was biological, genetic. It was about control of the human design. Babel and genetic, cultural fragmentation coders. When it seemed like the human project was finally advancing without direct divine intervention, one of the most enigmatic episodes of all antiquity appears: Babel. Most remember it as a story of pride and punishment. But the ancient texts tell something much deeper. In Genesis 11:4, humanity declares, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves." It wasn't arrogance. It was an attempt at unification, access, ascent, a collective movement to recover something that had been fragmented since the days of the flood, their code, their knowledge, their origin. But the text says, the Elohim observe human advancement and speak an unsettling phrase. Genesis 11:6. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Coders, nothing. It's the same concern Enlil expresses in Atrahasis, the same fear surrounding the tree of knowledge, the echo of divine fear before a humanity that is too conscious. That's why in Genesis 11:7, the intervention arrives. Let us go down and confuse their language. They don't destroy the tower, they destroy unity, because a united humanity, with a single language, with a single purpose, and with memory of its celestial origin, was a threat to the cosmic order. But here's the key most never see. The confusion of tongues didn't only fragment cultures, it fragmented lineages, fragmented memories, fragmented codes. The dispersion was not only geographical, it was genetic, a mechanism to dilute, separate, reorder, and control human inheritance after the events of Eden, the flood, and the hybrids. Because if humanity became one again, it would reclaim what it had lost from the very beginning, the knowledge of its origin and access to the code. Thus, Babel becomes the symbolic closing of a much larger operation, the fragmentation of the human project to prevent us from discovering something we are now starting to look at again. Lucifer, Enki, the conflict over human DNA. Coders, after going through tablets, sacred books, myths, and ancient warnings, there's a pattern we can no longer ignore. In all the stories, in every culture, at every border between the divine and the human, there is always a being who teaches and another who punishes. And this is where two figures that seemed unrelated stand face to face: Lucifer and Enki. The first called Bringer of Light in Isaiah 14:12. The second, Master of Wisdom in the Sumerian tablets. Two different names, but the same crime in the eyes of heavenly authority: awakening the human being. Enki, in Atrahasis, breaks Enlil's orders to deliver knowledge, laws, techniques, to modify, correct, and improve humanity. Lucifer, in his original sense, represents illumination, clarity, revelation. A figure who rises, questions, thinks, and for that reason is cast down from heaven, Isaiah 14:13-15. Both share the same divine crime, intervening in human development without permission. While Enlil and the Supreme Authority want to preserve a controlled, predictable, obedient project, these two do the unthinkable. They touch the code, the DNA, the consciousness, the spark that defines what is human. That's why they are punished, not for evil, but for interfering with the destiny set from above. Enki teaches the forbidden. Lucifer illuminates what is hidden. Both open human eyes, just as Genesis 3:7 describes after the serpent's intervention, another symbol of knowledge, and both pay the price. Coders. What we're seeing is not an isolated story, it's a repeating conflict. Who has the right to decide what humanity can become? The authority that wants to limit, or those who bring light, science, and awareness? Enki and Lucifer represent something no religion wanted to admit. The oldest struggle in the universe was not between heaven and earth, but between control and knowledge. And at the center of that war beat a treasure everyone wanted to possess: human DNA. Who controls the human code? Coders. After going through Genesis, Atrahasis, Enoch, and the oldest echoes of our history, only one truth remains that can no longer be hidden. The so-called seal of God was not a mystical symbol, nor a spiritual metaphor, nor an invisible mark on the soul. It was a design, a programming, a code written in the deepest part of the human being. In the Sumerian tablets, Enki intervenes, modifies, corrects, and protects that code, while Enlil reacts, restricts, and punishes when humans begin to awaken. In biblical tradition, a light bearer illuminates, and heaven casts him down. Two different stories, two narrators separated by thousands of years, but the same pattern. Knowledge becomes a crime, consciousness becomes a threat, and human DNA becomes the battlefield. Coders. The The celestial war was never about temples, nor religion, nor rituals. It was about the human project, about who had the right to modify it, about who should control the inheritance of our species. That war left traces. The Nephilim, hybrids born of forbidden mixtures. The judgment of the Watchers, punishment for altering the human line. The creation of divine bloodlines, blood mixed with hidden purpose. The battle for human inheritance, a conflict that runs through all of history. And now, after everything we've seen, the final question is not theological, nor mythological, nor spiritual. It is genetic. Who really controls the human code? Who wrote it? Who protected it? Who altered it? And why? Coders. What comes next will take us to the heart of that conflict. Because to understand the history of heaven, first we must understand the history of our DNA.